Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. We interrupt our regular programming in terms of the Shakedown series to bring you the new 5-page letter from prison that Chris Watts wrote, where he effectively turns on Nichol. It's the first time that he's actually done that. And one of the things he says in this quite incredible letter, incredible because it's pretty crazy, pretty outlandish, and he says it himself. He says, this may sound crazy, but I think I was hypnotized, right? And so we're going to be dealing with that in this episode. So if you're interested in the Watts case, you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, you can click on the link, the light blue icon on the bottom right of your screen, like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. Now, if you want to read the full page prison notes, so if you sort of feel like, please just get to the point, I don't want to really hear what you've got to say, well, then you can go to the link in the description, turn the video off, go to the link in the description, and you can read the whole letter. So those guys who want to do that, off you go. Great. Okay, so the rest of you, for the rest of you, in law, one is to prove a sticky little concept known as intent, right? So if your hands are dirty and all the evidence turns to you, as it does in this case, and you can't evidence trickster your way out, so you can't produce a text or a series of texts, you can't show anything else, whatever it is, an item of clothing or some evidence, then fiddling with your own intent is, I guess, the next worst thing you can do. How do you not have intent? Well, if you weren't yourself, if you were out of your mind, under the influence, over the moon on something, if someone else is pulling the strings. In other words, if you were sort of coerced or under duress, right? And I actually thought that Chris Watts did have something of a case, not a very strong case, but I thought that he may have some kind of case in that area if he'd made the case about sleep deprivation and the chemicals that were in his body. And apparently he said something about, he wished he'd been tested for drugs or something. I don't know whether that would have made a difference. If he was, I don't think anything would really have come up. I think he's just saying that, but that's my opinion. There are other cases as well where it's a pity they didn't test for drugs sooner, such as the Amanda Knox case. We're in the area right now in terms of this whole thing of, I didn't have any intent, I was hypnotized, I didn't know what I was doing. To some extent with Lori Vallow, it's more to do with her competency in court. So she's sitting in court, I don't know what's happening, I'm still under hypnosis from whatever, and her lawyer, I don't know if you guys know this, her lawyer Mark Means is quite desperate to maintain access to his apparently not completely compos mentis client who can't pay him, and he wants to know the names and credentials of everyone who's going to be dealing with Lori while she's in a mental health institution. So what I'm trying to take you through here is the kind of intertextuality with other people using the same idea of let's play with intent, let's fiddle with intent. I can't defend myself by looking at the actual evidence. I don't have an alibi. I can't evidence trickster my way out of it. So let's play with my own intent. And so we're seeing that with Lori Vallow. But how about, remember Jodi Arias' fog? Remember the moment when it came to the gory details of what happened to Travis, a fog rose in Jodi's mind, at least when she was in court and on the stand. I mean, remember this.
It appears then that your memory becomes faulty immediately upon you shooting.
Yeah, things get very foggy from there. When I sort of came out of the fog, I realized, oh crap, something bad had happened.
And then you got up, and then the fog started to come in, right?
I'd say the fog started to come in after the gunshot.
Of course, when Jodi Arias called Travis shortly after the incident, knowing he wouldn't answer, knowing that he couldn't answer, and left a message on his voicemail, she didn't sound foggy at all, did she?
You can call her back if you want, but it's not necessary. My phone died, so I wasn't getting back to anybody. And what else? Oh, and I drove 100 miles in the wrong direction. Over 100 miles, thank you very much. So yeah, remember New Mexico? It was a lot like that. Only you weren't here to prevent me from going into the 3 digits. So fun. Tell you all about that later. Also, we were talking about, when we were talking about your upcoming travels my way, I was looking at the May calendar, so I'm all confused. But Heather and I are going to see Othello on July 1st, and we would love for you to accompany us. I don't know when Team Freedom's event is, though, but, it's on the list, so we could do Shakespeare, Crater Lake, and the coast. So if you can make it. If not, we'll just do the coast in Crater Lake. But let me know, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.
So I'm going to come back to the Chris Watts case in a moment, also dealing with what he said in text and so on. It's in the Fun Data Review. But bear in mind what's happening here is Jodi Arias calling Travis's phone on that night, June 4th, 2008, at 11:48 p.m., right? And she's giving dates. She's talking about a date for a particular, I think, Shakespeare play on the 1st of July. Do you think that would be possible to do if you're foggy, right? Now, as I say, we'll come back to Chris Watts and deal with his fogginess. Obviously, we know that none of this is true, but it's interesting to see why that is the case. If you had to prove this, for example, in a court, what would you say? So if Chris Watts is trying to appeal for why he has a defense, why it's very obvious from a mile away that he doesn't have a defense. Another intertextual element in terms of this blanking out is from O.J. Simpson. He blanked out in his version of what happened in Nicole Brown's courtyard. As soon as it came to the details, then suddenly he couldn't remember anything. And so how can he have intent, right? How can he be responsible if he doesn't have any sort of awareness or consciousness when the critical event takes place? So in his own version, and this is a quote from If I Did It, and obviously in the book the word if is tiny, and it basically from a distance looks like I did it, right? Like a confession, and that's what everyone said. But anyway, to Ron Goldman, in his version of events, he said, "Show me how tough you are." And then this is his story. He says, "Then something went horribly wrong, and I know what happened, but I can't tell you exactly how. I was still standing in Nichole's courtyard, of course, but for a few moments I couldn't remember how I'd gotten there, when I'd arrived, or even why I was there. And then it came back to me very slowly. The recital with little Sydney on stage dancing a little heart out, me chipping balls into my neighbor's yard." And, we often talk in true crime about giving too much information, superfluous information. Well, this is it. When it's supposed to be talking about other details, he's suddenly talking about these details that really don't matter. And he goes on and says, Paula, angry, not answering her phone. Charlie, stopping by the house to tell me more ugly something about Nichole's behavior. Then what? The short drive from Rockingham to the Bundy condo. And now we're standing in Nichole's courtyard in the dark, listening to the loud, rhythmic, accelerated beating of my own heart. So that's the detail he gives you. He's in the courtyard, it's dark, and he's listening to his own heart beating. That's really all the details he's giving you. He says, I put my left hand to my heart, and my shirt felt strangely wet. And so he suddenly comes to when everything's over. And, essentially the whole story is about this moment, and of course it's not there. I know what happened, but I can't tell you exactly how. It's exactly what Chris Watts is doing. I know what happened. I just don't know how it happened now, now that everything's sort of where it is. So, when OJ was interviewed to promote this book, he was asked about his accomplice Charlie, and he couldn't stop laughing. And so we've also got accomplices now, supposedly, in Chris Watts' version.
Charlie came by and mentioned something about what was going on at her house. And I remember thinking, well, whatever's going on over there has got to stop.
I think that's true. I think that is how he felt, that what was going on there had to stop, kind of thing. And that brings us to another intertextuality. Amanda Knox, when her boyfriend recanted, withdrawing his alibi for her, then she also suddenly had trouble keeping the real world straight with her dream world. And this prompted a second confession or statement. Now, bear in mind with Chris Watts, we've also had, I don't know if one can call this his fifth confession or his fourth confession, but you had something similar with Amanda Knox, where there's a statement, then more information, then another statement, then more information, all within hours really of one another. I think there were ultimately 4 or 5 statements. And that's actually something I wouldn't mind doing a short series on, Amanda's statements, just on this particular topic of, kind of delusion and trying to hypnotize us, really, with these stories. And to some extent, I think people have been hypnotized. So I think it's an interesting word that Chris Watts uses, because I do think there's an element of truth that he was hypnotized, not in the sense that he didn't know what he was doing, and that he didn't have intent, and that he didn't have purpose, and that he wasn't acting with deliberation, because he certainly was. But I do think there's an element of hypnosis in the sense of, I think when you're in love with someone, right, when you're infatuated with someone, you don't even have to be totally in that place, but you can start becoming quite susceptible and vulnerable to certain ideas that are not necessarily logical or sensible or even rational. You might think, wow, I think this person really likes me, or I think something could happen here. And it's because you are, in a state of being attracted to someone. So you're not thinking in a sensible way. And that's obviously true, but it doesn't mean that you suddenly lack all intent as a person, that you lack the ability to function, right? And so in any way, with Amanda Knox, second confession, just listen to her vocabulary, right? And I want you to compare this to reading some of what says in his letter, and we'll analyze the letter in more detail. And you can, as I say, you can go to Crime Rocket to follow the link in the description, read everything that's there. But listen to the language Amanda Knox uses. She says, I remember confusedly that a guy called Patrick Lumumba, was involved, right? She's admitting she was confused, but she's, at the same time that she's admitting she's confused, she's pointing the finger to someone else. So it's a mixture of being confused and sort of kind of muddy thinking and being very specific. Not a man, a particular man, right? So after Knox signed this, the police in the room apparently embraced her. Knox apparently hit her own head as if, it's like, I don't know what is going on. And then she was taken to the canteen for an espresso, and then they arrested her. And then she penned the second statement. She wrote, I was under this pressure, and after many hours of confusion, my mind came up with these answers. I didn't come up with these answers. My mind came up with them. So, it's almost like Chris Watts saying, the confession I gave on the polygraph, I didn't say that. My mind said that, which is a weird distinction. Laurie Veller could say the same thing. I didn't think that people were zombies. My mind thought that, it was zombies. And Amanda Knox goes on to say, in my mind, I saw Patrick in flashes of blurred images. I saw him near the basketball court. I saw him at my front door. I saw myself cowering in the kitchen. So it's no longer Amanda saying, I did this, I did that, he did this, he did that. But I saw in my mind, I saw him this. And so it's this weird sort of pseudo-reality that's been created under the contrivance of a narrative in a confession. So you're sort of saying, well, I know I'm confessing, but what I'm seeing is what I'm saying I'm seeing. What my mind is saying that I'm seeing, right? It's putting that kind of barrier there to give you a sort of a back door, right? A back door is part of this whole thing, which is what Chris Watts gave himself in his first confession. He's giving himself a back door. So she says, I saw myself cowering in the kitchen with my hands over my ears because in my head I could hear Meredith. I've said this many times to make myself clear. these things seem unreal to me, like a dream, and I'm unsure if they are real things that happened or just dreams that my head has made to try to answer the questions in my head and the questions I'm being asked. So, she's being asked questions. She's saying, you know what, everything doesn't seem real, so I don't really know what I'm saying is things my head is saying I must answer or something else, right? And of course, all of that is quite different to when they were at the police station, and I think someone said, well, I hope Meredith didn't suffer. I hope she didn't experience pain. Amanda Knox jumped in and actually swore at her and said, of course she suffered, etc., etc., etc. I'm not going to repeat what she said here, but that tells you she was pretty clear on exactly what is going on, right? The problem Watts has with his hypnosis confession, let's call it that, the problem he has with his hypnosis confession, arguably his fourth confession thus far, is when you go through the phone data review on Monday morning, like Jodi Arias, he acts with pretty clear intent in the aftermath. He sends and receives texts, and his co-workers, when they arrive, have an impression of him being completely normal. He's texting what is going on at his work site. There's no question that he's not operating as he needs to operate on his work site. In fact, the next day he also wants to go back to work because he feels like, I'm fine. I want to carry on with my life. I want to go back to normal. I want to go to work. And this was something that I think Shanann's mother expressed concern about. Why is he acting so normal, right? And of course, him acting normal under those circumstances wasn't appropriate or normal. If it was true, if he was sort of hypnotized and things were really weird, and like OJ's coming out of this fake trance, then he would have said to them, whoa, I feel weird. What? His colleagues would have said, what's going on? And he would have said, well, how did I get here? Sorry, I think I've just blanked out. But he never did that. He never said that. And maybe if he did that, it would be part of the pantomime of the whole spiel, but he didn't do that. And so the hypnosis confession just wouldn't fly in an appeal. I don't think a jury would buy it for a second. Instead, and you could theoretically call up his colleagues to get their first-hand impressions, but they would have said, well, he just seemed completely normal. He was talking about a baseball game. He seemed to remember the score, this and that, and the next thing he was making jokes. Didn't seem to be in a daze. And not only that, we know that he quickly made arrangements with Primrose School and the realtor. So there was some continuity between the events that he was talking to Shanann about, not that morning. I'm talking about, although you could theoretically give him the benefit of the doubt there and say he did talk about that, but we know that he also spoke about that in text to Shanann in North Carolina. I'm just saying there's continuity between that and then the events when he sort of leaves home. So where's his fog if he's able to act in such an effective way? And the answer is that there's no fog, but he's trying to conjure fog into existence. But it goes further than that. On the body cam later that same afternoon, as well as the sermon on the porch the next day, and his chat with Coda Tuesday night, not a peep about any hypnosis, let alone Kessinger himself. He never mentions Kessinger during any of these opportunities. He could have. He could have said, you know what, I spoke to somebody and I'm not sure, but he just doesn't do that. Until he's kind of caught out, until he's in a corner. And not even immediately it's taken this long to sort of get to this point because he's desperate. None of this is rocket science, of course. People covering up and trying to grasp at straws to wiggle out of intent. It's not new. But I think it is interesting looking at how intertextual it is and also the language that is used. It's the same kind of language. I was confused. I realize it's crazy, but whatever, right? It's desperate wriggling of a crook trying to escape accountability for his actions. he can't make any of his lies stick this time for some strange reason, right? Which is why we ought to expect a lot more of this as time goes on. And what I find quite weird, I understand mischievous creators doing this because they've got their own agendas, they've got their own intentions. I can understand that. So I can understand a creator kind of taking any little tidbit and going, oh, could this be true? Chris Watts has said this. Could it be true? It looks like he's pointing the finger to this person. You know what? I think this is it. This is the truth finally, and that they want to make a big episode out of that and a big thing out of that, and then you go on to the next one. And so they want to validate it. In other words, they want to make Chris Watts seem like it's credible, so that they can string you along. And I don't know if that isn't worse. I don't know if it isn't worse doing that sort of thing. It's basically trying to, take something that a criminal is saying and actually make money out of it, which is in a weird way. I don't know. It's kind of being an accessory just through greed. I think Mommy Rambling spoke about the same thing in her video quite recently. Just the way that there's this deliberate ploy to try and make money out of a captive audience by lying. And there's something really shallow and debasing about that, which I think says a lot about us, says a lot about, you say, how did this happen with Chris Watts? It's not the case that there are monsters amongst us. I think we are all monsters. And some people are giving in to their own base natures constantly. And I think the other side of it is the sheeple that are out there that just go along, that just, and it seems to be almost a majority, that just go along and believe whatever they're told. And I hope that the Chris Watts case is going to show people what some people are like, that how susceptible people are to manipulators, to fake news, to opportunists and people who are trying to manipulate a situation for their own gain. It's happening in the real world, make no mistake. It's happening in the real world right now, make no mistake. But are you able to tell the difference between reality and things that are contrived? Are you? What is the reality with the coronavirus? What is the reality? What is the political reality in America? What is actually going on? Well, the Chris Watts case shows you just how difficult it is to stick to the authentic narrative, to even know what the authentic narrative is. Part of how you kind of realize that is by kind of assuming that everything that you're being told is pretty much not true, although certain fragments of it that are evident, it's self-evidently true. Those things are obviously true. I also think the demonizing of Nichol Kessinger says a lot about our society, how we tend to look in the wrong place when we're looking for truth. Nichol Kessinger has provided far more accurate information on the Chris Watts case than Chris Watts has. Yet people want to point the finger towards her. So in terms of the analysis of the letter, I do think it's interesting that Watts says Kessinger made him realize how unhappy he was. I think this is both because of her deliberately seducing him, but also because he was unhappy. He was unhappily married. I think when he decided to do what he did, he rationalized it with what he knew, what he'd experienced, right? And there's some quite interesting commentary from him, which I've also intuitive. I don't think you need to be a genius to know, just that Shanann was constantly on her phone. And if you've ever been in a relationship with someone who's just always on their phone, it's such a turn-off. It's so unattractive. You want to connect with a person, you want to have a meaningful conversation, but it's constantly being interrupted. They are constantly distracted. a notification is more important than you. And the notification might be, liking a picture of a flower or something absolutely arbitrary. But at that moment, that's more important than whatever you've got to say. It's more important than dinner. It's more important than your, it tends to undermine you as a person, this distraction, which ultimately feels psychopathic because the person's never there. The person never seems to truly care, truly have compassion, truly have empathy, truly is there in an emotional, real, genuine way, because all of that is directed to this self-generating algorithm that's going on. You should pay attention to this. That's interesting. Maybe you're going to be interested in that. And then you, this person that's in their life, is sort of a weak shadow of this stimulating thing that's going on their phone. But none of that stuff's real. What's real is reality. What's real is the people in your life, and the actual life that you're living. And some people have given up that reality for a virtual one. And it doesn't make them happy, but it certainly stimulates them. So anyway, he realized he was unhappy. And I think when he decided to do what he did, he rationalized it with what he knew. And perhaps a few of the things Nichol had said to him, encouraging him to get out of his marriage. What was Nichol's attitude to multi-level marketing? I mean, that was a mistake I made in the beginning, thinking that Chris Watts was really opposed to MLM and Shanann wouldn't stop doing it. But what if Nichol said to him, do you know that this stuff doesn't work? Do you know that you're never going to get out of your financial abyss if you stick with this MLM? It just doesn't work. Did she convince? And towards the end, he was starting to gravitate away from just the Thrive stuff. He was starting to eat properly and exercise properly. So was that a factor? Was she talking to him about that side? Did she convince him that was never going to be a yellow brick road out of their situation? Remember, the Thrive thing was a fairly new thing. It had come about really in the last year or two of their marriage, right? And then the other thing, which again, I don't think you need to be a rocket scientist to know, but it's quite interesting for me, seeing the things that I saw and knew intuitively and wrote about, coming out now after the fact. I mean, as I said, it's no surprise, but it's interesting that he says, for example, in one of the letters, one of the pages, she got plenty of attention in the office, meaning Nichol Kessinger got a lot of attention from the guys at Anadaka, from the operators at Platteville. She got a lot of attention. What does that mean? It means it makes sense. I've suggested as much. It's a male-dominated setup. And for the operators, Kessinger had to stand out as eye candy. And I think many of us have been in that situation where, I was in the military for a short time, where you have certain people in this male-dominated environment, and they are whistled at, and they are certainly getting a lot of attention, sometimes in quite an awkward, unpleasant way. But if they flirted with her, which I'm sure that they did, Kessinger had her sights on him. And why not? Compared to the average oil worker, what seemed clean in a way, groomed in a way, sweet and kind, especially towards 2017, 2018, his life seemed picture perfect. He didn't have that, because he was an introvert, because he was reserved, he didn't have that loudness, that brashness, that bravado that is typical of a lot of people in these, blue-collar workers in these sort of industries. He was kind of a gentle fellow, right? And of course that turned out to be too good to be true. His life seemed picture perfect as well. And I think it's illuminating that Kessinger's impression of Watts is largely formed by looking at pictures of his family. So she gets an impression from seeing him, but then she gets another impression looking at pictures of his family. And a lot of these some of them were taken by a photographer close to the family, Nick Thayer. So they're kind of studio photos, but a lot of it's all to sell. The whole idea is to sell the family to the thriving group, the thrivers, right? It's to sell this idea of a happy family. And so she's seduced by his fake fairy tale. I think a lot of people were. A lot of people, the media got caught up in this, what looks like this certain kind of family, right? Because those pictures did that. Those pictures did sell the fake happy smiles. And interestingly, one of the last things Shanann said was, I don't want to do a gender reveal with a fake happy Chris. And so certainly in that area, she wanted her husband to be genuine. So I think he was also used to being fake happy. Something else from the letter: even showing her a picture of my kids and telling her I was married did not deter her efforts. Well, that's because that's exactly what she wanted. Kessinger's sin was envy. Kessinger wanted what she thought he had, only to find out he didn't have it. And then I think the idea was they could have it together. So I actually haven't touched on very much of this letter. I will do so in part 2 of this analysis. I just don't want this to be a very long video. It's already past half an hour. So I will deal with more of the details in the letter in the next episode. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.